SurePoint Advisors is registered as an investment advisor with the state of New Jersey. Registration of an investment advisor does not imply any specific level of skill or training and does not constitute an endorsement of the firm by Securities and Exchange Commission or any state securities authority.
Welcome to the very first episode of SurePoint Advisors Financial Roll Call with James Fay. We are 10-8 in service. This is a podcast for law enforcement by law enforcement. I am James Fay. I'm a retired law enforcement officer and a financial advisor with SurePoint Advisors, focused on helping law enforcement officers with making educated financial decisions that will directly affect their retirement. I truly believe that this podcast will help to achieve that. We got a great episode for you today, and it's really the bread and butter or the nuts and bolts of financial planning. Today's episode, we'll be talking about taking ownership of your number one asset. I often speak at various law enforcement meetings, conferences, events, and my first question to the officers in attendance is usually, what is your number one asset? I get a lot of blank stares, and I kind of educate them a little on what an asset is. Simply put, an asset is something that you own. So, you have to realize that many officers are in different financial positions in their lives. So you might get a newer officer, a rookie, that still lives at home with mom and dad, maybe still on mom and dad's insurance. However, they own a car. They bought that new car as soon as they got that job. So maybe their car is their number one asset. And you might have an officer that's a little bit more seasoned and established, right? Maybe he has a family, some kids, owns some real estate. So maybe that officer would answer that his house is his number one asset. Or you'll have those rusty veterans, those officers that are getting ready to retire, and they're going to answer that their pension is their number one asset. Those are just some of the answers we get when I ask that question. But what I need you to take ownership of is that you are your number one asset and your ability to work, make money, and build wealth. If you do not take ownership of this, then there's no sense in even listening to this podcast. I'll save you the next 15 minutes of your life. You can just hit stop and move on. You and the ability to work, make money, and build wealth is your number one asset. Because this is the foundation on which you'll build your financial plan. And if you don't have your number one asset properly protected, then chances are that whatever financial plan you have in place, most likely will fail. We're going to briefly discuss some of the ways you can lose that number one asset. And then in future episodes, we're actually going to elaborate a little bit more on these topics. So how can you lose your number one asset? How about through loss of job? Think about what's going on in the world and this country today. Defund the police. The calls to defund the police. I can assure you that if we defund the police, the first thing that's going to go is money allocated towards training. The second thing that's going to go is manpower. Now, I've witnessed this in my career. I remember it. I remember in 2002, there was a small department here in Monmouth County that laid off 8 officers. The department only had 15. That's half of their department laid off. And probably one that hits home a little bit more, in 2009, the department that I worked for, the Monmouth County Sheriff's Office, they laid off 14 officers and 38 correction officers. 14 sheriff's officers and 38 correction officers were laid off. So let me ask you this. If you get laid off, will that affect your ability to work, make money, and build wealth? Sure it will. How about suspended? Suspended without pay. We see that every day. Go on a computer, open up your news feed. Some law enforcement officer got suspended, right? If you get suspended, is that going to affect your number one asset, which is you and your ability to work, make money, and build wealth? Yes, it is. So my question there would be, do you have the financial reserves set aside to last long enough to where you either get rehired from layoff or another job, or you come back from a suspension? Let's talk about lawsuits. We live in a very litigious society. People are suing people left and right. So ask yourself this: if you get sued, are your assets protected? I'm sure all of you in law enforcement here have responded to a traffic accident, and maybe one of the persons involved in the accident, one of the drivers, didn't have insurance. Or how about responding to a house for a slip and fall, or maybe a dog bite? You ever think how that's going to play out later, possibly in court, if somebody gets sued? So the question that you need to ask yourself, are your liability thresholds set up the right way on your property and casualty insurance? How about estate planning? There's 3 pieces of paper that we like to see in place for our police officers: your will, your power of attorney, and your living will. The will basically ensures that your wishes are carried out and your property is distributed in the way you choose. So if you don't have a will in place, guess who gets involved? The state. The state of New Jersey gets involved, and they will determine who gets your property. All because you didn't take the time to outline your wishes in a will. How about a power of attorney? The power of attorney is going to give one person the power to act on your behalf. This person will be given the power to make legal decisions about your property, your finances, or medical care. And lastly, your living will. The living will is a document that lets people state their wishes for end-of-life medical care in case they become unable to communicate their decisions. The living will do that. So let me ask you this: if you're laying in bed sipping dinner out of a straw for the rest of your life, unable to get up, is that going to affect your number one asset, your ability to work, make money, and build wealth? Yes, it is. Let's talk about sickness and disability. On the job, if you get hurt, injured, sick while you're on the job, what's that magic number? We spoke about it in the introduction, the 66 2/3, right? So if you get hurt, injured, or sick on the job, you'll get 66 2/3 of your salary and benefits tax-free. What happens if you get hurt off the job? If you get hurt off the job, will that directly affect your number one asset and your ability to work, make money, and build wealth? Yes, it will. The last one is going to be death. And this could be the most financially devastating to a family. Do you know what you're covered for while you're employed with your respected agencies? What is going to replace the income to your family if you were to leave this earth? Do you have any other life insurance in place other than what you get while you're employed with your respected agency? These are the questions you should be asking yourself. So we're going to cover all of these topics in depth in future episodes of this podcast. And listen, I'm not going to be the one behind the mic speaking and boring you for the full 15 minutes in the future. What I'm going to do is I'm going to have different guests. So if we're going to speak about wills, I'm going to interview Michelle Clark. Michelle Clark is an attorney with Birdsall and Laughlin here in Monmouth County. And Michelle actually handles all of the estate planning for our law enforcement clients here at SurePoint Advisors. Let's say we're going to talk about lawsuits and property casualty and your liability thresholds. Well, I'm not going to sit here and talk about it. What I'll do is I'll interview Kristen Land. Now, Kristen is a licensed property and casualty agent here in New Jersey, and she takes care of all our current clients, our law enforcement clients, by checking their declaration pages and seeing where their thresholds are. Very, very important. So let's recap for a minute. 10-11, prepare to copy. What did we talk about? We talked about what your number one asset is, and that's you and your ability to work, make money, and build wealth. You need to take ownership of that. There are certain ways you can lose that number one asset. We spoke briefly about loss of job, lawsuits, estate planning, sickness and disability, and death. This needs to create a call to action for you. You need to say to yourself, am I protected? Is my number one asset protected? If you are a current law enforcement client of mine and you are listening, and you still need to take care of one or more of these topics that we just spoke about, you need to reach out to me. We need to get the train back on the tracks and discuss it and take care of it. For the law enforcement officers that are listening that are not clients, please feel free to use SurePoint Advisors as a resource. You can call me in the office, 732-876-3777, or check the show notes for my email address. Feel free to email me. I'll get back to you. If you find this information educational or it has you thinking about protecting your number one asset, then hit subscribe. It will notify you about upcoming episodes. You can also check the podcast description to see how we can tune in for future podcasts, or feel free to visit our website at www.surepointadvisors.com. With that, thank you for listening to SurePoint Advisors Financial Roll Call with James Fay, and we'll be 10-7 out of service.